Right, so what does it say? Supply chain management or SCM involves the coordination of all supply activities of an organization from its suppliers and delivery of products to its customers, right? So it involves the coordination of all supply activities of an organization from suppliers and delivery of products to its customers. If we look at figure 6.2, here you can see supply chains, which shows members unique to supply chain. So this version shows a rather simplified version of a supply chain, and the figure B shows a supply chain with more or added number of participants, right? With more intermediaries, right? So figure 6.2 introduces the main players in the supply chain, as we saw. Then figure 6.2a, the main members of the supply chain are the organizations that manufacture a product and or deliver a service, the suppliers and the buyers, right? So in figure 6.2a, the main parties you find here are the manufacturers, right? If it's a manufacturing organization, right? The manufacturers, and then suppliers and the buyers. So for example, if we assume that this organization is a manufacturing organization, right? So the main parties of this model, supply chain model, are this manufacturing organization, the supplying organization, and the buyers or the customers, right? For most commercial and not-for-profit organizations, we can distinguish between upstream supply chain activities, which are equivalent to buy-side e-commerce, and downstream supply chain activities, which correspond to sell-side e-commerce, right? So we have discussed about this concept of buy-side e-commerce and sell-side e-commerce as well, right, earlier. So this point says that for many of the commercial organizations as well as many of the non-profit organizations, you can clearly identify a set of upstream supply chain activities, which we refer to as the buy-side e-commerce, and a set of downstream supply chain activities, which we can identify in other terms as the sell-side e-commerce. So if you look at this figure once again, now here you find the upstream supply chain, right? So whom do you find in this upstream supply chain? You may have suppliers, you may have suppliers, and their suppliers, right? There may be so many tiers in between, right? We have talked about this concept when we talked about this in MIS as well, right? So this upstream supply chain is referred to as the buy-side e-commerce, and then the downstream supply chain, on the other hand, referred to as the sell-side e-commerce. That is what this point explains, right? Then supply chain management includes not only supplier and buyer, but also intermediaries such as suppliers, and customers. Look at figure 6.2b. Now, in this figure, like I mentioned earlier, there are certain added parties, right? There are intermediaries in between. Now, these suppliers, like I said, these suppliers may have other suppliers, right? Now, I hope you can remember when we talked about this example, we took the example of Nike, for example, where their suppliers have many tiers, right? Many tiers which contain suppliers and those suppliers. So, for example, in order to manufacture a shoe in Nike, so there might be one supplier who's supplying the upper part of the shoe. There might be another supplier who's supplying the sole of the shoe. So the person who's supplying the sole of the shoe, once again, may have another set of suppliers. One set of suppliers may be providing them with the compressed rubber, right? And the compressed rubber suppliers, they might be getting the raw material of the latex, the rubber latex, from the another set of suppliers, right? And the same with the upper part of the shoe. So if there are a group of suppliers who are providing the upper part of this shoe, they might be getting the material from a set of suppliers, material to manufacture the upper part, right? And then the eyelets or the laces from someone else, right? So likewise, it's a long chain of suppliers and suppliers who ultimately finally combine together, helps to manufacture this shoe, right? And the same way, the downstream supply chain may also have many business partners or many intermediaries in between, right? Organizations may be providing to directly maybe wholesalers, right? Then retailers, there might be distributors in between, like logistics companies in between, there might be warehousing facilities in between. So all these organizations, parties and people combine together, right? All these business partners combine together may form these intermediaries until the product or service is finally reached to the consumer, right? So the next point says, indeed, some companies may have first tier suppliers, second tier and even third tier suppliers, or first, second and higher tier customers. So like I mentioned earlier, there might be certain levels of customers, levels of suppliers along this supply chain, right? I hope it's clear to you. Then the next point says, because each company effectively has many individual supply chains for different products, right? The use of the term chain is limiting, and supply chain network is a more accurate reflection of the links between an organization and its partners. So when you take a single company, right, it manages more than one supply chain in the real context, right? So for example, if we take a company like Unilever, right? So it has many individual supply chains which facilitates the manufacturing of different products, right? For example, they are having shampoo, they're having soap, detergents, and then other cosmetic products, right? So there is a separate supply chain dedicated to each of these products, right? Separate set of suppliers, separate set of component suppliers, separate set of raw material suppliers, right? So likewise, different supply chains merge together when producing these different products. Therefore, instead of using the term chain, so when you say a supply chain, it seems like it's a single chain, right? But in the reality, in the real context, it's more than just a single chain. Like I mentioned now, there might be a combination of several supply chains for a single company. So when that is the case, we use the term supply chain network as a more appropriate term to reflect these different links between an organization and its different partners, right? So I hope you can understand the difference between a supply chain and supply chain network. So we call it a supply chain network because it's a combination of multiple supply chains, right? Multiple supply chains linking different business organizations and partners, right? So I hope you understand those differences. Then technology is vital to supply chain management, since managing relationships with customers, suppliers and intermediaries is based on the flow of information and the transactions between these parties, right? So we saw in the earlier slides also how important is technology for supply chain management, how it helps to manage relationships with the organization's customers, the suppliers, and various other intermediaries. So we saw how it helps the flow of information and how it facilitates the efficient transactions between these parties, right? So I have a small video clip to show you. Now we have discussed several concepts which we talk about when it comes to supply chain management. We understood what supply chain is, what supply chain management is, and also we understood who are the main players in the supply chain and what sort of things get exchanged within this process of supply chain management. All of these things we have now discussed. So in order to give you an even more clearer picture, I have a small video clip which I would like to show you. Now this sort of sums up everything that we talked about and gives you even additional information which will help you to get a better idea of the concept of supply chain, right? So please let me know if you cannot hear or see properly, right?
What is a supply chain? A supply chain is a global network used to deliver products and services, from raw materials to end customers, through an engineered flow of information, physical distribution, and cash. Basic supply chain for a product. The below figure illustrates a very basic supply chain with three entities: a producer with one supplier and one customer. Four basic flows that connect the supply chain entities together are as follows. Flow of physical materials and services from suppliers to the end customer. Flow of cash from the customer to the raw materials supplier. Flow of information back and forth along the chain. And reverse flow of product returned. A basic supply chain in this figure is made up of these entities. Seller is a supplier who provides goods and services, or a person or organization with whom the buyer does business. Their generic term in marketplace is seller. Supplier provides materials, energy, services, or components for a product or service, such as plastic, fabric, electric wiring, or aircraft.
Now here understand that this seller is also termed as the supplier, right? The seller means the person who's supplying these raw materials, energy, services, components, and etc. to a manufacturer or a producer.
A producer is the one who receives components from the seller to produce a finished good or service, such as shirts from fabric, crockery from plastic, power from electric wiring, or provides transportation through aircraft. The customer is the one who receives the finished product. That is the one who wears those shirts, uses the crockery, turns on the lights, or flies in an aeroplane. Strategies. There are three.
Right, so we are going to skip a little on these strategies as we are not teaching into this depth and at this course module.
Three types
so
of
I'm going to fast-pace this
or product.
a bit.
Example, 4 hours. There are 4 flows in supply chains. Information flow includes invoices, sales literature, specifications, receipts, orders, and rules and regulations.
Now here you can see we talked about certain information flows which happen within the supply chain earlier. No? So these kinds of information are what usually there are even more. For example, these kinds of information is what usually get circulated through a supply chain.
Primary cash flow includes payments of products and supplies. Primary product flow includes materials, components, supplies, services, and finished products. Reverse product flow includes returns for repair, replacements, recycling, and disposals. Supply chain example. Consider a supply chain model of a bakery who sells a variety of cakes, and this baker is one end of a supply chain. In this case, a supplier is a wholesale food distributor that provides ingredients such as flour, cream, and sugar. The bakery is the producer who turns those ingredients into a variety of cakes. The bakery is operated by an owner who is the retailer and who sells these cakes to the customer. Supply chain in manufacturing. Consider a complex manufacturing supply chain model that appears in corporate supply chains. In this model, you will notice the second tier of suppliers and more distribution centers and customers. These suppliers supply materials as well as services. You put the manufacturing at the center and suppliers of components to the immediate left. The Tier 1 suppliers have their own suppliers in Tier 2. For example, Tier 1 supplier might be a wholesale food distributor that purchases flour from its own supplier. This supply chain for flour starts from farmer's wheat field, which is supplied to the food distributor, processed in a plant, shipped to wholesalers, and distributed to the stores.
Now here can you see an example of how multiple tiers are involved, right? So for this particular stores, they are buying flour from wholesalers, right? So this flour, they have their own suppliers for these wholesalers, and for this flour, the people who supply the flour to the wholesalers, they get their supplies from the farmers who provide the wheat to them. So likewise, there are supply chains. So there are multiple tiers when it comes to the upstream supply chain.
No matter how far you travel toward the left, you will never run out of new tiers of suppliers. Primary product flows from left to right, and primary cash flows from right to left. Supply chain in services. Initially, the supply chain model was developed for manufacturing, but service industry has supply chains too. A few examples of services industries are electricity provider, legal advisor, real estate, construction, software house, and even federal government. In its broadest sense, service industries include all organizations except farming of an electric utility. It receives products, services, and supplies, and dispenses its services to home customers, commercial customers, and to other utilities. Firms generally pursue one of the two types of supply chain management.
Right. So that is the basic idea I wanted to give you about supply chain management. There you saw the basic parties that could be involved in the supply chain management, as well as how multiple tiers can be involved in supply chain, how there can be supply chains for product as well as for even service, right? So then moving on to the next point, just take a few moments or take a few minutes to read out the next 2 points before I explain them to you. Right. So what does this say? The main strategic thrust of enhancing the supply chain is to provide a superior value proposition to the customer. So we talked about what is a value proposition in the strategy lesson. We understood that the value proposition in simple terms is the set of benefits or the bundle of benefits that you deliver to your customer, right? So what is the main strategic focus of enhancing the supply chain enhancing the supply chain in terms of providing this kind of a value proposition to the customer, right? So what is the strategy that organizations can use to deliver a superior value proposition through their supply chain to their customers? So one such strategy is efficient consumer response, or ECR. So I explained about this in the earlier table which I have described to you. So here it says efficient consumer response, or ECR, is important within the retail and packaged consumer goods, right? So this packaged consumer goods is also referred to as fast moving consumer goods, right? So this FMCG market, or the packaged consumer goods market, usually uses this concept of efficient consumer response in order to deliver a better value proposition, a better level of customer service to the consumers, right? So what do you actually mean by improving customer value? We talked about this in detail in the strategy chapter as well. Improving customer value involves improving product quality, customer service quality, and or reducing price and fulfillment times. So we understood in the previous chapter that this delivering of value to the customers may come about by using several variables such as product quality, service quality, price, and the fulfillment time. So if we want to improve the value we deliver to the customer, we can either improve our product quality, or we can improve the quality of the service that we provide to our customers, or we can even reduce the price of the product that we are selling, and even the fulfillment time that we use to deliver to ultimately deliver this end product as well, right? So by focusing our attention on these elements, we can improve the value we deliver to the customer. And to do this technology, or this strategy of efficient consumer response helps us a lot. So I explained to you earlier that this focuses on how an organization tries to deliver a better service or better value to a customer by having better coordination with different business partners that they are connected with along the supply chain, because these different partners can give a feedback to the organization on what the customer wants, right? What they demand more, and what they reject or what they refuse to buy, right? What is their higher preference to, right? And also through consumer feedback also you can get this idea. Now in the current context, the consumer themselves are actually connected to the organizations through various platforms such as social media or e-commerce sites, right? So these kinds of technologies also can help organizations to get an idea about these kinds of trends and patterns and preferences. And whenever the consumer demand changes or demand patterns change, when new trends emerge in the market, so the organization should be able to efficiently respond to these communications that arrive from the consumer's end or from the market end, right? So efficient consumer response becomes very helpful at these kinds of situations for business organizations, right? Then increasing efficiency in obtaining resources from a supplier organization or distributing products to customers reduces operational costs and so increases profitability, right? So if an organization is able to increase the efficiency at which they obtain resources from a supplier, that means if there are no delays, for example, in sourcing resources or the raw materials or the parts, right? If we can get the resources, the raw materials and the parts as and when we want them at the production floor, right? If that process is efficient. And also, if an organization has the ability to increase their efficiency in terms of distributing products to consumers, that means there also there has to be no delays. Maybe you're using distribution partners, maybe you have outsourced this to logistics company, maybe you are directly distributing this to the consumers. So if there are no delays in this process, if you can minimize the time taken for this distribution process, right, uh, then it has the ability of reducing your organization's operational cost if there are unnecessary delays in between, right? Um it is not productive for the organization, it's not good for the organization, right? If there are unnecessary parties in between, so many unnecessary parties in between who causes these kinds of delays. On the other hand, it also increases the operational costs of the organization because you have to pay to each of these intermediaries involved in between, right? So if an organization is able to cut down on these additional people also, if they are able to sometimes as we explained earlier, sometimes organizations are easily able to disintermediate by using technology within their supply chains, right? So through these kinds of things, they can reduce their operational costs. And also this in turn increases the profitability. And also on the other hand, if there are unnecessary delays, let's say the time to market is very long or very lengthy, then sometimes we might not be able to deliver the product as and when the customer wants it, right? So also on the other hand, the customer might be dissatisfied and there might be loss of sales, right? And in the long term picture, your competitors might be winning over you, right, who have more efficient processes. So likewise, there might be uh, other indirect impacts such as this as well, if your process of obtaining resources and distributing products is inefficient, right? So therefore it is very crucial that organizations increase the efficiency in sourcing the resources as well as distributing the products to customers, right? So this helps an organization to increase the profitability. So with this, we will stop the lesson for today, the new lesson we have started on supply chain management. So if we quickly go through what we have learned so far, we understood what supply chain management is, and we understood how digital technologies enable uh, more efficient information flows, and how it helps to lower the costs of organizations at various places along the supply chain. Also, we talked about certain problems of supply chain, right? There we talked about this concept of inventory turnover, which is very important because management of inventory is very crucial for successful management of supply chain, right? Then we related certain common problems that we find in a traditional firm when it comes to supply chain management. So here we talked about a new concept called this supply chain management software, which are available online, called software as a service. So you can Google and see there are many famous such software. There's one called DaVinci, and software such as Logistically and 3PL warehouse manager. So all these kinds of software, they help in streamlining the supply chain management process, and these kinds of software are usually used by organizations in order to smoothen or streamline their supply chain management process. Then we related certain parties who are usually involved in supply chain management process, and we understood that using the term supply chain network is more appropriate than supply chain, because in the current context, organizations get the help of multiple supply chain for different products and services they offer. And then we talked about efficient consumer response and how it is important to deliver superior value to the customer, and also how it is important that organizations increase the efficiency of obtaining resources and distributing products to the customers. So here, whenever we say products, it also means services, right? Not only just products. This can also be a service organization, but since our main focus in this course is for a manufacturing organization, we repeatedly use the term product. But please keep in mind that supply chain management does not only talk about delivering a product, right? It also can include service organizations which deliver a service to the consumers. In the previous video also that I showed you, you saw how electricity, so an organization related to delivering electricity related services delivers their service to their customers, right? Okay, so any questions so far? Anything that you do not understand? You can let me know. If not, we can stop for the day. I think as usual, there are no questions. So, right, then thank you for your participation today. We'll meet on the next day, and make sure that you celebrate election victories in peace, right? Without causing any trouble to anyone. So until we meet again then, have a nice day and thank you.